Well, as the dreary winter weather brought almost all flying to a halt, the disheartened men of Jasta 18, the wind seems to have gone out of their sails. The Staffel was now commanded by Oberleutnant Wilhelm Turk. He was a regular army officer, he had the seniority, but he lacked the dynamic leadership of a Berthold. And in the dreary winter weather, the Staffel tried to find some way to relieve the boredom and ennui of the winter months. So how do you do that? You party. This is Jasta 18. German Airmen's albums are full of photos of costume parties like this one, and which belie the popular image of the stiff-necked Prussian militarists. These were, after all, very young men, living life on the edge, and they knew how to let off steam and have fun. And this is Joseph Welchens. This is Arthur Rahn again. This is Walter Staffel. This guy is putting the make on this lovely young lady right there. And I can't recognize most of the others because of all the costumes and makeup. This is Bella, the dog. And here's another image of a Staffel party with Joseph Welchens doing his best Charlie Chaplin impression. And note the well-stocked bar over there. Parties like this kind of give the red noses a whole new Well, in the great offensive of March 1918 was coming, the veteran pilots of Jasta 18 were gladdened by the news in early March that Berthold was returning to the front. And he was unfit for flying. You can see his arm in a sling. But he was still returning, and he was eager to take part in the big spring offensive. A number of photos were taken to record the occasion. And this is the whole group. This is Hans-Joachim Boudica, and there's another story there that I really don't have time to tell. This is Welchens. This is Georg von Hentelmann, and we can identify all of them, but it's in my book.
My book.
Berthold was eager to take part in the offensive, but he had a problem. Events overtook him rapidly. On 15th of March, just 6 days before the offensive was to start, Hauptmann Adolf von Tuchik, the commander of Jagdgeschwader 2, was killed in combat. Berthold was named as his replacement. Now, JG2 consisted of Jagdstaffeln 12, 13, 15, and 19, not Jasta 18. Berthold strongly desired to have his pilots of Jasta 18 remain with him. Here's Berthold at table. You can see the slings of his, the straps of his sling. This is Welchens. This is Oliver von Beaulieu-Marcanet. So, what to do? Here it is. The assertive and demanding Berthold figured out a solution. And what Berthold wanted, he generally got. Right on the eve of the greatest German offensive of the war, Berthold somehow pulled off a switch. His men, here he is, sitting there with his men. The mechanics, the airplanes, lock, stock, and Spandau barrel were switched with the man of Jasta 15, which was one of the component units of JG2. And this is Jasta 15, with its commander, August Raben. So, Jasta 18 magically becomes Jasta 15. Jasta 15 became Jasta 18, and vice versa. You might call it an early example of identity theft. Jasta 18 was moved to Brühl in the 18th Army sector, while Berthold's boys took up their new jobs as Jasta 15 in JG2 in the 15th Army. Now we have a whole new cast of characters. And the commander of the new Jasta 18 was Staffelführer August Raben. He was a highly decorated veteran of a field artillery regiment. He'd flown first as a fighter pilot with Jasta 36. And then he commanded Jasta 39, which was one of 3 Jastas that were sent to Italy for a brief time. And in Italy, he downed 2 Caproni bombers before he was wounded. And then he returned to the Western Front to lead Jasta 15, and then Jasta 18. And here is their first airfield at Brühl, and then they moved to Lomé. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But anyway, May 1918. The new Jasta 18 made several transfers of aerodrome as the German offensive went forward. Like Berthold, Robin distinguished the aircraft at his command with a very distinctive color scheme that is still very popular with modelers, enthusiasts, all kinds of people today. You can see at least one model in our model contest. The Raven insignia was unique among German fighter units, more like a French escadrille emblem. It was, of course, a play on the name of the commander, which translates as ravens. And incidentally, in the old German and Norse mythology, the raven is always an emblem of death, so it makes an appropriate symbol. And they used a stencil to apply it very uniformly to every aircraft. And the red and the white coloring, which extended to the wings eventually, was a very distinctive mark of Jasta 18 aircraft. One of my favorite pilots of the new Jasta 18 is Hans Müller, which is about as common a German name as you can get. In fact, there are 2 German aces named Hans Müller. He'd already scored 2 victories before the big Berthold swap, as I call it, transferred to Jasta 15 in July 1917. And he became one of the most proficient pilots in the unit. He devised a personal emblem of this slanting black and white diagonal band, which he used very consistently throughout the war. This is his Pfalz D3 in Jasta 15. This is his rather familiar triplane, which he flew a little later. The personal markings were extended to the tailplane. And he continued to use this marking in the livery of Jasta 18, the famous red and white colors. Unfortunately, we don't have any photographs of this particular airplane, but he did leave a description of it in a combat report. And I want to thank Jim Miller for producing this fantastic color profile. Well, the Ravens of Jasta 18 flew south in June, all the way to, right there, to Montingen. This was part of the response to the bomber offensive by Hugh Trenchard's independent Air Force against the industrial centers of Germany, such as Stuttgart and Mannheim. And Steve Sotheby can tell you all about the strategic bombing campaign, one of the very first and best organized in the war. Kurt Monington, also one of my favorites, was another proficient Staffel pilot. He was a former grenadier in infantry soldier. He served in Jagdstaffel 22, 12, and 15. And in the early days in Jasta 15, he served alongside Ernst Ude and Heinrich Gontermann. And he, too, would perform quite well in 1918. 6 of his 8 victories were against bombers of the independent Air Force. And he continued to use his skull and crossbones insignia. This is now a fairly familiar photo of his Albatross D5 in Jasta 15. And there's been a lot of controversy over the years about this particular aircraft. We now know for certain it was Monington in Jasta 15. He was not in one of the Death's Head Hussars cavalry regiments, but he still chose this symbol, and he used it very stylistically on his beautiful Albatross D5A in Jasta 18. Well, on the 12th of August, 1918, Monington continued the use of his insignia on this Fokker D7, and the brilliant red and white Fokker D7s of Jasta 18 are known throughout the enthusiast community today. And on the 12th of August, the Staffel intercepted 11 DH-9s in number 104 Squadron heading for Mannheim. After a 40-minute running battle, the DH-9s made a run for home. Their defensive formation fell apart, and Monington shot up the petrol tank of one DH-9 that would land intact on Buhl Aerodrome, and Lieutenant Schleichart shot down another. This is just a typical example of one of the many encounters between Jasta 18 and the independent Air Force. This is the commander, Lieutenant Robin, and he poses with a DH-4 number 55 Squadron that he shot on the 30th of August for his 4th and final victory. The DH-4 was taken over by his squadron and painted in full Staffel livery. And they used it as a hack machine just to fly people around and deliver brochures, that kind of thing. It's a magnificent looking aircraft. Unfortunately, they don't seem to have put the Raven insignia on it, but it's still a beauty. Well, I know we're running low on time, JR, but I've got so much to say. 12th of September, the inexperienced American Army launched an offensive to take the San Mihiel sailing field, just northwest of Jasta 18's operating area. On the 14th, first day of good weather, it finally allowed the pilots on both sides to fly into the battle area. And that morning, Captain Charles Biddle, commander of the 13th Aero Squadron, identified by the Grim Reaper insignia, flew a patrol over the Mosella River. All three flights of the squadron were in this flight, and his pilots were enthusiastic but very green. And they were jumped by 3 or 4 red-winged Fokkers of Jasta 18. Among them was the formidable Hans Müller, who was flying probably this D7. This is his D7, which continued to use his striped band insignia. He had a very good day. They dived onto the first flight, and American Leighton Brewer wrote that they were flying a low patrol, quote, when we were attacked by a bunch of red-nosed Fokkers. We lost 4 airplanes in 1 minute. Hans Müller had a field day. He was credited with shooting 3 SPADs at the 13th Aero, and later in the day shot down another SPAD for his 4th victory of the day. The first 13th Aero pilot to fall was Lieutenant George Cole, who was killed. Lieutenant A.A. Brody was captured, as was Lieutenant Freeman. Probably the worst ordeal, certainly the worst ordeal, except for Cole, who was killed, was suffered by First Lieutenant Charles W. Drew. This is Brody's SPAD, which was captured intact and was a trophy on the airfield of Jasta 18. Charles Drew got an incendiary bullet in his right thigh. He continued to fight, and he wrote later, "One bullet ripping my blouse open, another my breeches. Finally, I was hit in the right arm by an explosive bullet." He fainted in the air, but revived in time to crash land behind German lines. Amazingly, he survived the amputation of his right arm in captivity by German doctors, and he lived for many, many more years. In fact, he was interviewed by Alan Tollett, one of our better members. Well, handicapped by a lack of petrol and oil, pilots of Jasta 18 continued their battle against the bombers of the Independent Air Force. And this is from the cover of Keith Reynolds' book, Independent Force, which I highly recommend for anyone interested. And this is a slightly incomplete rendition of Monington's D7, but that photo, which tells that the fuselage was black striped on the borders, was published for the first time in my book, so he did a very good job. The last recorded victory of Jasta 18 was scored by Kurt Monington on the 23rd of October, when he shot down a DH-9 from number 104 squad. One Jasta 18 pilot, Heinz Küssner, later stated that Jasta 18 was credited with 126 victories in its 2-year career. Modern historians like Rick Guyton have only found records for about 110 of those. They had 8 pilots killed, 11 wounded, and 2 taken prisoner. The exact details of their record may still be unsure, and whatever the exact details were, the men who flew the colorful fighters of Jasta 18 were always a force to be reckoned with, who left us a rich legacy. And these are the Ravens on Montingen Airfield, and there's Robin in the center, and Gunther von Buren, who flew the aircraft with the 4 chicks running along the bottom, many of you know. This is Hans Müller, that's Kurt Monington, and they were quite a group. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak.